Thank you, Fernando. I'm Hilary Dufour, and for my capstone project, I developed a web app builder application that simplifies the Southern Sierra Nevada backpacking route planning experience. The areas of interest are the Inyo National Forest, Yosemite, Kings Canyon, and Sequoia National Parks, which are in California. So in this modern age, there's vast amounts of information online, and GIS provides a great opportunity for you to bridge and centralize data. I wanted to make an application that did this for the Southern Sierra area. Right now, the area is spread out on different websites, so the process for planning a route is more cumbersome than it needs to be. The goal was to simplify this process by centralizing it, editing, proofing, exporting to the university's ArcGIS portal, building a web map, and then lastly, making it consumable in a web app builder application. As I said before, the resources are located on different websites. So a lot of the information for planning a backpacking route is tied to spatial location. So it's a perfect opportunity for me to merge my passions for GIS and backpacking. A little background on what it takes to get a permit and plan a trip. The wilderness permits are associated with different trailheads. And the image on the right is a sample of what a map looks like on recreation.gov, which is where you would go to obtain a permit. But it lacks enough spatial information. It just shows roads, it shows contour lines, but it doesn't show something very important, which is trails. So I needed to gather a lot of data to make this application useful. And I found trails on different websites on the National Forest Systems, ArcGIS Hub, National Park Service portal. And then some of the trails were missing. And I found them on the website All Trails. I downloaded them and I exported to an ArcGIS format. Trailhead information was also found online through a US Forest Service Recreation Opportunities feature layer. I also found data on Sequoia and Kings Canyon ArcGIS Hub, and recreation.gov was used to proof the locations, as well as Google Maps and Google Earth. I used digital elevation models to add surface information and calculate average trail grade and trailhead elevation. I found this on the National Park Service and California Air Resources Board websites. And lastly, I wanted to create a good sense of situational awareness and so people could understand what area and wilderness they were in. So I found geographic boundaries on different websites, the National Park Service portal and Forest Service Clearinghouse. Some of the data that's needed to plan these backpacking trips, it's not static, so I didn't want to publish it myself. I added external web services that show air quality, weather watches and warnings, and wildland fire perimeters. Because a lot of the times you're backpacking in wildfire season, so you need to know if there's a fire near your route. I also wanted to include some campfire information and information centers, which I found online as well. This sums up the basic workflow for my application. The first step was to research what was existing and how I could use that or improve upon it. So I downloaded the data, I had to merge it into the same schema in a geodatabase. I proofed and digitized the trails if they were missing. I used the digital elevation models to calculate average trail grade, which was used in assessing a trail difficulty level. And then trailhead elevation was added. The Forest Service data already had this, but I gathered it for national parks using the DEMs and then the points. And I used the geoprocessing tool to add surface information. Lastly, I enhanced the attribute tables for these layers to make the information as useful as possible. One such attribute was whether or not an area was dog friendly. That's one of the criteria that some people are curious about, and it's just one thing that I wanted to add to my application so you didn't have to go to another website. The next step was to add it to web map. So I compiled the different layers, I customized them using pop-ups with arcade expressions to make it more user-friendly. I added the web services where the data was not static. And then I did simple things like changing layer visibility and the scale range so it wouldn't inundate the user with a lot of different information at first. The last step was to create the web app builder application and make the data in a format that was friendly to non-GIS folks in a way that would you could use different widgets to make it consumable. So one of the main widgets I used was the filter widget, which you'll see later. I created a splash screen, which has a basic user guide, but I think the application is pretty intuitive. I also had a base map gallery widget so that the user could change a base map and view contour lines if they wanted, or aerial imagery. There's an option to bookmark, which is a great way to easily access it, the map or an area of interest on your phone, because it's also mobile friendly. And it gave the users also options to toggle layers on and off. Lastly, I created custom symbology that I thought matched an outdoor aesthetic. So I think the best way for me to demonstrate why this application is needed and why it's useful is to give you a use case. And I combined two different real-life backpacking experiences I had last year, which, as many of you remember, was a record year for wildfires. So say you have a 3-night trip planned with a couple of your friends, but unfortunately a wildfire started right near your trail. So the route that you had planned is no longer doable. It's also only a couple of days before your departure. So the first step would be to visit recreation.gov, which provides wilderness permits for Sequoia, Kings Canyon, and Inyo National Park, or Inyo National Forest. Click on the link to open the wilderness permits site, and it'll take you to this introduction page, which has public notices and basic information. You can click a link to explore what the available permits are, and it asks you some basic questions such as group size, and if you're exiting at Mount Whitney or not, as well as the date. After picking the date, the table below will show numbers and counts of what the permits are that are available. The W shows walk-up, but because of COVID, most of the permits are now limited to online. The map on the right provides the trailhead locations, which I'll also add. Some of those locations aren't correct. You can click on a trailhead name, and it'll take you to a page for that trailhead. For example, for George Creek, it gives you basic information as well as providing a Forest Service PDF map, which I've also included in my application. But as you can see in the map, it doesn't actually provide trails, which are very necessary. So for planning backpacking routes, a lot of the criteria is spatial. So it was easy for me to incorporate this into my application. For example, so it's only a couple of days before your departure, and hypothetically, all the trailhead permits are not available. So that means you want to find a trail that's non-quota, which means there's no cap at the amount of permits that are issued. You also, of course, need to find a trail that's away from wildfires and a safe air quality, because you're going to be huffing and puffing up that mountain. So this is where my application comes in handy. This is the initial splash screen. It provides links to the public notices pages for the different regions, because this information is prone to updating frequently. Provides a basic user guide to different widgets. This initial view shows all trailheads in the area that are for backpacking, as well as the trails in a black dashed line. I can click the filter widget and now turn on non-quota trailheads. So only those are shown, and these are the areas of interest. So you can zoom into them. You can turn on the air quality service. And I've incorporated arcade expressions into the pop-ups to just make it a little more colorful and fun to look at. You can make sure that it's safe air quality, and it also provides a link to a cam if you want to explore the area. Next, you can turn on the fire perimeters, and the pop-ups show relevant information such as containment date if it's already been contained, and the acres. Some additional route requirements that you're going to have to look at for planning this alternative route. So a lot of times people get altitude sickness if you're driving from an area that's at sea level. So I incorporated this into my application. You also need to find an area that's sufficient connected trail distance. a few of the trailheads are only linked to say 5 miles of trail. So because you're going for multiple nights, you want to find a route that's at least 20 miles. And lastly, you want to find a little bit of an easier hike, and you can determine the level of difficulty by viewing my average trail grade layer, which I'll show you. So right now you're only viewing non-quoted trailheads. You can toggle on trailheads that are below 700 feet, and that uses a filter based on data in the attribute table. You can click on the trailhead icon. It shows you a variety of information and shows campfire rules, how to obtain a permit, what the permit quotas are, and it links to the websites. Next, just to make sure that your trailhead is linked to an adequate amount of trails, you can toggle on that layer. You can also just view the map, of course. And next, you can toggle on the trail's average trail grade layer. You'll see that's symbolized based off the average trail grade, which I calculated using the add surface information tool, which calculates average slope for a polyline, and it uses a DEM. I then reclassified that using Python if-else statement into 6 different classes. I proofed it by checking this half dome trail, which if you're familiar with, the end of it is cables and it inclines about 45 degrees. You can also turn on the base map to see just how steep it is. So I used this area to make sure my process was working as I expected. And it was, as you can see, it's the purple color, which means it's a 20% plus grade. So for future app developments, there's a few additions that I think would really enhance this application. Currently, there is an option to group layers, but unfortunately that's not available in the Web App Builder. There's an elevation profile widget that I would love to incorporate, but you need Web App Developer Edition. I'd also really love to add, I'd like to add web scraping to view what wilderness trailheads currently have permit availability. There's no application where you can just quickly view that on a map, and I think that's much needed in the outdoor industry. And then lastly, I think this methodology that I use is scalable to different areas where people like to enjoy backpacking, and it would be interesting to try to apply it to different regions. To sum up this application, it centralizes data, it serves as a bridge between different web resources, and then it delivers it in a consumable format, which is Web App Builder. And the goal of this application, generally speaking, it's to allow people to spend less time using computers and more time enjoying the outdoors. Thank you for watching my presentation. Please check out the app at the link below. Does anyone have any questions about my application or the process it took to create it?